Welcome to the Choice Words podcast, and welcome to the Bravosity. I'm Brevin, and with me today is someone you may know from our review discussions of Outward, Limnus Gate, and the AOW review discussion, which part 2 is going to be coming out soon. Nathaniel.
What up?
So, Choice Words is our new weekly podcast, and we're just going to be talking about basically anything gaming, mainly RPGs, but if we just see anything unique or just want to talk about certain things in the industry, we may end up talking about that. So what are we talking about today, Nate?
We're talking about RPGs being made into TV shows or movies.
And so the main two that I think we are going to focus on, that I think me and you are attached to the most, are both Bethesda Softworks properties, which I guess they're Microsoft properties now. The Elder Scrolls Netflix show and the Fallout Amazon Prime show, which it's kind of interesting that a Bethesda Softworks title and a Microsoft title is being split between like two streaming services. Like they're both owned by the same company, but one's going to Netflix and one's going to Amazon Prime. Kind of weird.
Yeah, that is a little bit weird. Well, who's actually in charge of making the show or the shows?
I don't know. I know someone to do with Westworld is making the Fallout show, and I'm not sure about the Netflix show. I haven't seen anything. The Elder Scrolls Netflix show. I haven't seen anything about who exactly is making that, who's attached for it. There may be information out there. I've seen some actors come out that are going to be on the Fallout show. Walter Goggins. He's not on very much stuff, but he's really good in everything he's on. And he's going to play a ghoul, and I mean, he already kind of looks like a ghoul. No offense to him. So I think that's a good fit for him.
Well, I was going to say, the people who are actually in charge of developing the show, that could be why it's split into different services. They couldn't get two on the same services, or two on the same streaming service to develop their shows at the same time.
Yeah, and those streaming services are probably fitting or putting a good amount of the bill on the show. They're probably putting a good amount of money into it, I'm sure. So talking a bit more broadly, instead of just talking straight about the Elder Scrolls and the Fallout TV shows, talking more broadly about shows based on RPGs. I think the biggest problem I see with that, and the biggest problem I think a lot of people are going to see with that, is how do you take an RPG which is all about choice and being able to be whoever you want to be in whatever setting and through whatever parameters they put in there, and adapt that into a TV show that has absolutely no input from the viewer, and obviously you have no choice or anything like that. How do you bring that to the screen, or can you?
I think obviously the show's not going to be able to feel like an RPG or anything, but I do think that they could have a pretty good separate story from all the main works. If they make it just follow a character with a good story in that world, I think it'd make an entertaining show.
I think you're right. Just like anything else, if you have a good character with a good story, it's going to be interesting. And I suppose what they're drawing on more than the games mechanically is the setting, right? And the thing about that is that Fallout and Elder Scrolls settings were both created to a point to work with the mechanics. Like that's why a lot of the things work the way they do in the setting. Like Elder Scrolls has a very down to earth view on fantasy. Like all of the fantasy elements are almost scientific. Like the gods in the Daedra are just basically facts, and magic can be measured, and it's just all feels much more like a science, and everything feels a lot more realistic than other fantasy arts, and that comes from I think, the simulation elements that were in the early Elder Scrolls games. The game mechanics were trying to allow you to be whoever you wanted to be in just the simulation of a fantasy world. And to do that, they wanted to make a as realistic of a fantasy world as possible, I guess.
Yeah. It definitely helps with the amount of lore they wrote for that. Definitely makes it where they could expand on everything, and that's how it feels like a science, is because there's actually like books and books worth of information to help expand on every aspect of that series.
And see, there we could see a big problem, which we've already seen with ESO, and that's watering down the lore and or altering the lore, retcons. We even see that in Skyrim and Oblivion, and that can cause
Yeah.
problems too.
Yeah, where is my flying whales that the Nords hunt on top of the mountains? Where is that? In Skyrim. Exactly.
Yeah.
Hopefully the show can do a really good job in whatever region it takes place in at helping expand while not watering down the lore.
A big thing that I wouldn't like to see, that I think would be a big mistake in any of these RPG adaptations, and pretty much any video game to TV or movie adaptation, is just trying to straight adapt the story or an altered version of the story, like we see with the Halo show. I haven't watched it, but I know that it's just an altered version of basically the original Halo trilogy, and
Um,
that
I
puts me
don't think
off.
so. That is a prequel. The show's a prequel to like the beginning of Master Chief's interaction with the Covenant.
Okay, my bad.
It doesn't cover the original trilogy so far, at least. But
Okay,
hopefully
my
it
bad.
doesn't,
Like I
because
said,
we've already played an epic game that told the first three games in the most perfect way. So I hope they never mess with that.
right. So apparently, since I haven't seen it, probably shouldn't have said that. That's not what's going on in the Halo show currently. But my point still stands that they shouldn't do that, and I think you agree with me on that. Like they shouldn't
Yeah,
adapt Fallout 3 or 4. Um,
yeah. I don't
there is,
imagine that they do a very good job making a film adaptation of any of the main stories of these games, especially since they're RPGs, because they'd have to try to go with one track that the player could have gone with. And that's not that fun or interesting, honestly.
there is a case to be made about making a show based on like the first and second Fallout games, or maybe just the first game, because they already have a canon ending to those games, and
Yeah.
it's a story that a lot of people, modern audiences that play the modern Fallout's, haven't been able to experience, and won't ever be able to experience just because they don't want to go and play a game that's that old and has some of the systems that has. And the original Fallouts are great. I love them. I've beat them both a couple times, and they let you do a lot of things, but they are cryptic almost in the way they give you information, and you really have to figure them out.
Yeah.
And even
Um,
then, it doesn't always feel fair or fun or reasonable. But the quality of the writing and the art design and the setting, I think, really pushed me to continue through those first games.
yeah, you watch if they make a Fallout 1 that's based on the first Fallout, you just watch a good 3 hours of the main character trying to find rope. And then just like not being able to find it at any settlement, even when you see it used to build all their junk buildings, and you can't find any rope anywhere.
And then they go back to the place they needed it, and it's in a locker 5 feet away.
Yeah. By the
Uh,
way, I tried that and it was not in that locker. I was screwed.
but that's another thing. I was talking about how the setting of Fallout 1 and 2 is really what keeps you going through it, the setting and the story. And there are other things. I mean, there's a ton of different ways to go through it, and that's definitely another factor in that. But talking about the setting and the story, the atmosphere and the setting of that game is something that'd be extremely hard to nail.
For sure. I think they'd definitely have to be able to replicate the same feeling that the games have for the show, for it to really feel like it's a Fallout show instead of an independent show that happens to have a lot of things from the Fallout universe in it. It really need to get the same vibe down to not just be another post-apocalyptic show instead of being a real Fallout show. Which that'd be hard for Fallout. I don't think it'd be very hard for an Elder Scrolls one, though, because Elder Scrolls has a pretty relatively basic fantasy feel about it.
It's very broad,
and,
too, Elder Scrolls.
Very broad. Throughout all the games, they don't have the same exact feel, because if you take, like, Morrowind, for example, there's this, like, cynicism throughout most of Morrowind. This whole, like, feeling of inhospitableness in the area and harshness amongst the people and their practices. But then you go to, like, Cyrodiil, it's just your basic medieval people who just happen to have the occasional Roman architecture. And then you get Skyrim, where everybody talks all this shit, but nobody really does all this shit. But I think that's more of the people making the game and watering down the lore a little bit there.
And talking about that feeling, it's hard to get the right feeling or even know what the right feeling is for Elder Scrolls because it's so broad, because you have ESO doing all these different things and having its whole own vibe, and you've got Skyrim and Morrowind and Oblivion that all have a very distinct vibe to them, and they have unifying themes and motifs, and of course, history and the setting, but each one very much does its own thing, and I think it's going to be really hard to pinpoint what makes the Elder Scrolls for someone making a TV show.
I feel like the easiest thing that they could do, while still making it pretty good quality, is sticking to one main region, because then they only have to worry about one culture, for the most part, except for characters from other cultures showing up. But if they really, like, made sure that in the background, in the way people interact with each other and stuff, you just see all this cultural elements from the area, I really think it would just get the feel on its own. As long as you see the right kind of architecture, the right kind of clothing, and people doing the practices of that region, and not even in the forefront, but also in the background. Things like that. I think that have a good feeling no matter what region they go with, practically. But it'd probably be best to stick with regions already explored, because I feel like people would probably get a little unhappy having a region they haven't explored yet in the main games being a feature of the show.
Yeah, it reminds me of like when they added Somerset Isle to ESO.
Yeah.
It's like this mythical thing that's been talked about for so long, and everybody's wanted to see it, or a lot of people have wanted to see it, and then you go there and it's in ESO, so it's like
watered down.
I mean, they call them theme park. Yeah, they call them theme park MMOs for a reason. It's come to Somerset, see all the sights, ride all the rides, fight the monsters, bring your friends.
Because, like, I'd say Skyrim had a more, like, low magic vibe. I don't know if you're familiar with the low and high magic terms, but it's talking about fantasy universes, how much magic has to do with the average society. Well, Somerset's supposed to have this high magic type feel where you're just seeing people use magic in regular daily stuff way more often. Things like that. But other regions have had this like low magic feel, except maybe Morrowind. But I feel like they didn't really give off a good feel about it. It's just they threw a bunch of elves into that place, made some
Um,
uniquely colored trees,
yeah, and they
and
just really had to
that was,
pigeonhole it into the mechanics that the ESO is given. You have to have
yeah,
certain things in all the cities and stuff like that. And it's not bad. It's probably the most fun I ever had in ESO, and I did enjoy ESO a lot. It's just a step down in regards to setting and lore and
yeah,
feeling like Elder Scrolls.
yeah. ESO was definitely good, but there's a lot of writing quality that wasn't as good. But that's partially to do with the scale of the game. The game is absolutely gigantic, and I mean, they had to make a lot of areas smaller than they would be if they got their own game for that region. Except for Riften. Riften was gigantic. Yeah, they definitely had to water down quite a bit to fit it into that scale of a game.
And I could definitely see them watering down locations in a TV show and watering down lore.
Yeah, for money especially, you could save a lot of money by making a place look boring instead
Yeah,
of
and
nearly as interesting.
that's not even really us like saying they're cheap or anything. It's just
Yeah,
a
it just
fact.
it could take a lot of money to flesh out just a single building. If they really wanted to make a single area look really nice. But I mean, if they did some stuff in like Hammerfell or something, if they're since they kind of have a Arabic region kind of vibe with their architecture and stuff for the most part, mixed with some Indian stuff like from India, I feel like they could probably capture a lot of the horror regions easier because generally that stuff is made of things you could go out in the woods and just go cut down some trees, set up like market stalls and things like that pretty easily. But if
Another
they
thing,
ever try to get like a nice building, that would cost a pretty good amount.
another thing is with the realism and the grounded setting that Elder Scrolls has. Shoddy CGI, I think, could really take you out of it.
Yeah, if the magic and stuff like that looks terrible, or the creatures that they can't use practical effects for, then it's gonna make the whole show's quality not nearly as good as it could. It's kind of
Uh,
like you ever see the like Teen Titans show that they had on I
a
think
little bit.
Netflix? It was terrible. It was a terrible show for a lot of reasons. And that was partially because of the bad CGI in a lot of parts, them having to water down characters so they didn't have to use CGI as often or
Uh,
use any practical effects, and then bad writing on top of that. So they kind of failed on every base there.
and the thing is, especially with new Bethesda, well, not even necessarily just that. With any Bethesda of any time, the story they're going to want to do for the show is going to be grand, I'm sure. And that just has to do with a lot of shows nowadays. Everything has to be big, bombastic, amazing, grand adventure. It's probably going to have to do with the Daedra and the gods and going to have massive world ending consequences. And if they don't
It'd
have
be
the
kind of
budget for
cool
that,
if they didn't do that. It'd be kind of cool if it's just like relatively normal dude, not some prophetic hero or anything. Just a normal guy ending up in situations with Daedra. That'd be kind of interesting.
absolutely. No, I feel like that is absolutely what they should do for both of these shows. For a Fallout or a Elder Scrolls show or any show based on an RPG Don't, for one, absolutely don't try to adapt an entire game and change it, and don't do. You don't need these giant grand stories necessarily if you don't have the budget for it, and especially in season one, especially starting out. Do something small, do what would be a side quest in one of these RPGs instead.
Yeah, and like for a pretty good example of a show that's able to get like the main character doesn't have to be fighting some super badass or something, yet the show can still have a really good intense feel, is like a Game of Thrones. Just like every sword fight seems like it could be the main character's end. Whereas like if they're trying to make it feel like, say, the prophetic hero from any of the Elder Scrolls games, you just wipe the floor with a bandit. Sword fights are nothing. You have to be fighting some giant beast or something for it to actually feel all that intense. But I hope that they don't do that. If it's a relatively normal-ish person for both these shows, and where each fight seems like it could be consequential,
Yeah,
like they definitely need the action to seem consequential, or else it's not going to feel
yeah.
as good. Unless they're trying
Um,
to do the power fantasy thing, which I don't think is as good for TV shows. I think
yeah,
that that's
yeah,
something
definitely.
that's way better for games, because you feel the power fantasy playing a game. You're watching somebody else feel the power fantasy in a movie or show.
I got something for you. My guess right here, beginning. I can guess what the beginning of both of these shows is going to be. Elder Scrolls show. Some guy's going to be in prison and escape through some random means.
Of course.
Fallout show is going to start in a vault. Some crazy shit's going to happen through the first episode. The end of the episode is going to be them walking out of the vault. Um, and maybe we'll get a shot of the wasteland, and then it'll cut. And it'll be like, dun, 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 and it'll zoom. It'll be like the white thing on Fallout 3 where you see all white, and then it zooms out and you see your characters and the big landscape. Guarantee that's what's going to happen.
And then just Ron Perlman, war. War never changes. I actually really hope it doesn't take place in a vault from the beginning. I kind of hope that you start off seeing a character that's a wastelander, either in the wasteland going to a town or already in a town, because I think is starting in a vault's not going to be as good.
It's going to
As
start in a vault.
I feel like the amount of stuff they've put in vaults so far, I think that they're not going to be able to write a good and compelling vault tech test to be happening in this starting vault,
Right, compared
or it's
to
going to be a
a lot of other
repeat of
ones.
one that already exists. Which wouldn't be necessarily bad if it's taking place like before one of the games have taken place, but in the same region as one of those games. You could be seeing the main character starting off in one of these vaults that we got to read the stories about the horrible stuff that went down in the games.
I want a game, or I want a show based on Gary.
Just main character's just named Gary, and all he ever says is Gary.
So they thought making the Mandalorian was hard, but making a main character who never took his helmet off. Have one that can't speak either.
Why is that even hard at all? Main character who never takes his helmet off? That sounds like a relatively easy thing to write.
Because you got to bring attachment to. You got to let the audience get attached to him, and
Master
it's hard to show
Chief.
emotion. It's hard to show any emotion with the helmet on.
I was gonna say, Master Chief is somebody that never takes his helmet off. Everybody got connected to him within the first 3 games.
Not in the show.
Yeah.
He takes everything
Oh
off.
no. Oh,
Spoilers.
no. Yeah. I feel extra connected to him now.
Takes it all off.
But you don't get to see his face still, though, right?
No, I'm pretty sure you do.
Oh, boo! If you get to see his face, that's not That's not
Pretty sure they
good.
show his face in the first episode.
That sucks. The whole point is that you're not supposed to be able to see his face.
Well, to talk about the Halo show for a minute now. The thing is, though, the reason you don't see his face is because he's supposed to be whoever, right? He's supposed to be anybody.
Yeah,
And
except bald. In every case, he's bald. He's got that military cut.
he's supposed to be a suit of armor, though, that anybody can get into. Whereas with the show, they're trying to make him a character, which I don't know if is the right approach. But let's reel it
Yeah.
back. Let's reel it back to talking about these RPG shows.
Yeah.
One thing I want to talk about is um, other than just not adapting entire games and having small stories, another thing that I would like to see is references and characters do not make it Fallout, right?
Yeah.
The Brotherhood of Steel, Super Mutants, Robco, Vault-Tec, this isn't what makes it Fallout. What makes it Fallout is that war never changes. That the themes are resonating through the entire thing. That we see a cold, dank, cynical world with a comedic edge. Um,
And that only adds to the, like, creepy feeling. The humor that's put on top of such a cynical and terrible world just makes it almost creepy in a lot of the places. You're just listening to this upbeat 50s music while you go through this building full of skeletons and burn marks, creatures that are ready to eat you.
yeah, it's an interesting contrast.
And you know what? They could probably add horror elements pretty easily into a show with, like, in certain parts, obviously. They could
Yeah, I
probably
mean,
add those horror elements without it taking away in any form.
I would say there's horror elements in Fallout games.
The first time I played it, there sure was. I remember playing Fallout 3, having to hop on top of a rock because a whole pack of Yao Guai was running around. It's night, pitch black, and at the time I was a little kid. I didn't even know I could turn up brightness on my TV. I was dumb. And I can't see anything until it's right on top of me, and I just see the face of this thing. And after that, I was just like, well, I'm never going to go in that region of the Fallout world ever again.
That's something
And then I
hope
kept going to
see.
Megaton. Yeah, that'd be kind of cool.
Not that specifically, but the struggle of living in this wasteland, and like you could make a show just about that in the Fallout universe, and not even have too much of a plot of like a grand plot or anything that has to do with all these different
I
things. You
don't
could just
think
have a show
you
about
would need one.
surviving a harsh wasteland.
Yeah, I don't think you need a grand plot just because the survival in itself makes a compelling story.
As long as
the
you've
entire
got
story.
good characters.
Yeah, the entire story being based on this certain character trying to survive in the wasteland could really cover a lot and could have multiple arcs if they felt like it. Like, say they owe money to somebody, or Caps. They owe Caps to somebody. Now they need to go find Caps or they get hunted down, so they're either going to be doing one of those two things. That in itself could make an entire season worth of content on just an arc like that.
You're right. And you
Or
know,
needing to just go to some place could take a whole season.
If they used something like that, if they used smaller stories in both of these shows, in Elder Scrolls or the Fallout show, or mainly any RPG show or any show really, uh, they need to start out with a small story, and then as the seasons go along, they can bring it into a grander scale if that's what they want to do. I mean, obviously, you're going to have to raise the stakes as it goes along.
Just don't go into the Dragon Ball complex.
Where you just always have to raise the stakes.
Yeah, every episode the stakes get raised. Even in one conversation, the stakes have raised.
Yeah, the important thing be able to continue to raise the stakes is to keep the start the floor off low.
Yeah. I mean, you could even make the whole first episode them just dealing with pretty regular survival life problems like varmints and trying to travel to some place. Like, you could start off pretty small and still make it to where they almost get their ass whooped or killed.
That's the thing that you should maybe think about. Both of these settings have so much range when it comes down to it. There's so many different stories, different kinds of stories you can tell. We don't need the same story repeated. We don't. We can have a hero's journey, but we don't necessarily need a hero's journey as the main story. We don't need a chosen one in the Elder Scrolls. We don't need a vault dweller in, although I guess there is a chosen one as well in Fallout.
Yeah.
We don't necessarily need that.
By the way, go over again exactly the layout of a hero's journey.
Man, I don't know.
Because I don't know. Do they need to start off as a chosen one to even fulfill the hero's journey?
No, not
story
necessarily.
archetype?
It's broad, but the hero's journey doesn't need to be quite as utilized as it is in media today.
I mean, if the conflict is small, then it'd be pretty easy to be able to break apart from that.
That being said, they could do a big story still. It would just be a lot harder. I would like to see political stuff. I would like to see large factions with complicated issues in either of these, in Elder Scrolls or in Fallout, especially Fallout. But I think a Game of Thrones styled political show could work. But
probably.
I just really don't think that they'll do that. I think that we're gonna get a Bethesda Fallout show.
Yeah. And, I mean, lately adaptations have been going to streaming services I have not had a lot of faith in. Like, almost at all. From some of their superhero stuff hasn't really hit its mark. Most things based off games have not hit their marks. Almost all of them. And that's not even recent. That goes back, like,
to
my entire life. The Mario movie.
For your life. The freaking Mario movie was like the OG of bad video game movies.
And then every Resident Evil movie.
I love the Super Mario Bros. Movie.
Oh, I like it because of how bad it is. It's funny. And I mean, even some of its humor that was meant to be there was funny as well. But like, the funniest part is how terrible it is.
It's also got like a pretty cool, like, cyberpunk dystopian setting, which is strange to say.
Yeah, that's true. It does have a kind of interesting setting.
You know what? Get the guys that did the Super Mario Brothers movie to do the Fallout show. That is the vibe we need.
I think I think that the one thing that they could do to really make both these shows shine is something that I think the first season of The Mandalorian did. Really nail down the culture of the areas and the feel of each area. And that means they're going to need to pay a lot of attention to the background. Relatively, I think a small, more grounded story that doesn't have a grand scale or anything, I think that could be boring if all the setting is not done well. You can make a grand scale story not as boring, even if the setting is like kinda But if you try to do a small scale story, which I think they would benefit a lot for it being an adaptation of RPG, then they've really got to nail down the setting. Because that's one of the things that sold me on the first season of The Mandalorian, is you see all this stuff in the background that looks nice, it matches the feel, it matches the planet that we've all seen for the most part. Most of these planets they went on, like Tatooine. If they can make sure to get that, then I think the show will be good.
I think what The Mandalorian did too is it played slightly into nostalgia, but that first season it really made its own thing. It really made
Yeah.
its own little pocket of the Star Wars world, basically. Like we're on Tatooine, but this is a different part of Tatooine. This is a different side of Tatooine that we really
Yeah.
haven't seen. Um,
And like that more grounded in the beginning of that season story of him just being a bounty hunter. I loved that part. Actually, I think the show started to get a little watered down as it started going into too grand of a scale. Because it's kind of cool to just see a space bounty hunter like running around doing bounty hunter stuff in this
and
lawless universe. I thought that that was actually really cool.
in addition to that grand scale, they just started adding much more uh, winks and nods to the old stuff. A lot of more references, and they do the references do impact the story heavily, and they fit within the story, though, which I think is what works really well about the references. Even in season two, they do start to go a bit heavy on them, but I think they make them work because they integrate them so well with the story, and they make them actually important, like Ahsoka and the spoilers for Mandalorian season two. Ahsoka, Luke, and Boba Fett all fit really well into the story and have important roles to play in it.
Yeah. I think one thing is, though, and they're going to continue with having Baby Yoda, but they really made a lot of money on Baby because they got the kids' attention, and that made them so much money in products. And I feel like that actually made the story not as interesting to me because we've seen Jedi problems all the time. Every movie's Jedi problems, following Jedi characters. And it was nice to have the disconnect from that with this more down to earth bounty hunter guy, not a space samurai. So
And
I
that's
I
why I
think
don't.
that like as they keep tying in Baby Yoda, they're gonna have to keep tying in Jedi stuff and make it grander and grander scale. But I think they could really do good with having the more grounded Fallout and Elder Scrolls show.
Yeah, and like the same way, I don't want to see super mutants. I don't want to see the Brotherhood of Steel really. It'd be
If it's
fine.
not in a place that, if it doesn't take place in a place that we've already seen, where we know this stuff's already at, then it's not going to be that good to then be like, oh, super mutants are here too. The Brotherhood of
Yeah,
Steel is here too.
because they've
It's,
already watered that down so much
yeah,
with Fallout 3, 4, and 76.
yeah. It's like the Brotherhood of Steel's everywhere now, practically. I mean, if they're in the Midwest, the Enclave's in the Midwest, they're all, well, now the Brotherhood of Steel's practically not on the West Coast, but they used to be. They're somewhere near Texas, I believe, and then they've got a bunch of the East Coast
Yeah,
as of now. And then now West Virginia. So they've got way more Brotherhood of Steel than they really need. And it'd be nice maybe if they don't take place in one of these areas, if their only reference to them is maybe something very quick. Like you
right. Like
just
a
see
piece
one
of armor.
single dude. Yeah, or maybe like a dude who was a part of the Brotherhood, but like they're not even a main character. They might be a side character or something.
Right. They just make like a passing mention about it.
Yeah, maybe you see a guy wearing the armor in the background in like a bar or something. That'd be kind of cool.
But I would like
You,
to see new factions, new
yeah,
groups, and it does make you think though, like this is a Fallout show. How can you not have the Brotherhood? How can you not have super mutants? I want the NCR. Why, if you don't have all this stuff I know, what makes it a Fallout show, right? And
that
it's
is
that
the
vibe.
vibe, yeah,
It's the
for
atmosphere.
sure.
It's the cynicism.
And
And
then
same thing goes for the Elder Scrolls.
and there's still a lot of stuff that you'll see in the background that would tie in to having similar settings, like every single computer in the Fallout universe is Robco. So they're gonna still have a ton of that technology in the stuff in the background, and the cars are all gonna be looking like the cool 50s future kind of look. Like, there's definitely gonna be a lot of stuff where you're gonna look at and be like, oh, this is Fallout just by seeing it, but to make it really feel like Fallout's that vibe for sure. And they don't even need to have the factions from all this stuff. Like they could get new factions, and that would be great. But I think they could pull off a West Coast one. It just it would take some finagling.
um,
Like if it's anywhere near New Vegas, unless it's happening before the events of Fallout New Vegas, then they're going to have a rough time because they're going to probably
that's
have to canonize something, and that would suck if they canonize a certain ending of Fallout New Vegas.
that's one of the crazy things to think about is like where do you even place this in the timeline? Either of these, because you've got to if you make a prequel, then everybody already knows sort of how it's going to end, and
Unless it's in a new place. If it's a
right,
new
right,
place at a different time, it's all good. But if
and that's
it's in an old place at a different time, then it gets real hairy.
and that's why you need to have a disconnection from the mainline series and games while possibly still having an effect on that world eventually.
Yeah. I think honestly you could probably put the show in any of these places before the events happen and relatively put the main character on such a small scale that it's like not something you even have to worry about necessarily. That's in a place that already has been fleshed out in a game. You
They're
could
not going to
make
do it.
the character have such a small scale of their quest or mission to where they don't even mess with the main universe too much.
It's got to be a
But
grand, action-packed adventure with world destroying consequences, Nate.
yeah, that's kind of exactly what I think. But it would just be nice. Like, and it can be action packed, but make it to where it doesn't need to be like Rambo 3 level action packed or something like that, or like Suicide Squad where things are blowing up constantly and they're just mowing down tons of troops. That would relatively not be as good. If they just make it to where small action sequences can hold just as big of an impact as big action sequences, like
Yeah, but
uh
that first or that second Suicide Squad movie, I
oh,
think
I'm
that
not I'm that fits well with that genre. It's a
no, I think
superhero
that
movie.
that
It fits
vibe
well, pretty well.
fits would fit well with Fallout, with more cynicism, more grittiness,
But
and
there
much
needs to be,
clumsier combat.
yeah, there needs to be more consequences to combat. But like,
Yeah,
there's a certain movie, and I'm having a hard time thinking about the name of it, but it's like a Western movie, and in the end of it, it's just the main character and the main villain are out in the desert, like way out there, hunting each other. Both of them have guns and they're hunting each other, and it's only two guys out in the desert, and it has suspense. And it is very entertaining to watch. And
yeah.
I think that
I,
if
I,
they could try to nail that feeling, it would just be amazing. Where
um,
every fight can be the end. Well, I mean, obviously, if the show continues, it's probably not going to be the end. But still, every fight could be interesting.
I think Fallout especially really needs to have, like I said, clumsy seeming combat. Like very, like most people in the Fallout universe aren't trained soldiers. They're survivors, and
Yeah,
obviously you're
random
gonna
people with
have
guns.
right. Obviously you're gonna have people that are much better and much more trained in combat, who actually look like they know what they're doing. But I would like to see like people getting dirty and
Yeah.
nasty and falling over, and maybe their guns jamming, or
Yeah.
shit's falling apart around
Them
them, and they have to adapt,
them
and
getting
on both
actually
sides.
injured as well.
Yeah,
They're not gonna be this omniscient being who can dodge every bullet and make every correct move.
yeah. They're not gonna have
Yeah.
stormtroopers shooting at them and always hitting their armor.
Or just never hitting them at all.
Yeah,
Like, that's just ridiculous. But, I mean, like, that very Unreal style combat fits well with uh, certain universes and certain stories. It would not fit well with Fallout. It needs
I
to be a
think
more realistic kind of grittiness that fighting with guns in real life is, where people look and act scared and they make wrong decisions under pressure and things are blowing up and they're rolling around in the mud, all sorts of things like that.
absolutely. I think the Elder Scrolls show though could actually benefit from that more heightened action,
Yeah,
with
but
the
they
magic and
they'd still have to
especially
be careful not to make their character this like practically superhero level character
yeah,
as well. But
healing magic might be used as a MacGuffin too many times.
yeah, well, it's kind of like I think The Witcher did a pretty good job with a lot of its combat. Its combat still felt pretty impactful. And I mean, Geralt's like practically a superhero of his time, but the combat still felt really good. It felt good to
Impactful.
watch. Yeah, impactful. It's kind of like the combat in superhero movies isn't impactful anymore.
Not at all.
Like back when those movies first came out, it's just like, damn, there's some badasses. But now the badasses are the ones who are taking hits and dishing them out, or where there's a real threat to
Yeah.
their life. Kind of like seeing Iron Man for the first time. His armor deflects all the bullets. Stuff like that. There's really no impact to any of the fighting
Yeah.
in that movie, and it was good when
It's
it came
just
out. I still think it is good, but like
it's a
it
lot of
wouldn't fit.
visual noise.
Yeah, and
It's just stuff happening
yeah,
sometimes.
and it just wouldn't fit well with this kind of show. It fits well. That kind of combat fits well with superhero movies. Fits
The
very well with superhero movies for the most part,
I don't
especially
know.
Marvel.
I
Of
think
the two big superhero brands, Marvel specifically, it fits pretty good with.
yeah, I would say I feel more satisfied even in superhero movies when we see the more grounded and stuff with heroes taking damage.
Yeah,
D-
for
it
sure.
depends on what you're going for though. Whether you're going for taking a gritty character like the Batman, the
Yeah,
new Batman movie. The combat felt great in that. It felt
amazing combat.
impactful and
Like,
clumsy, though,
I
like we were
felt
talking about.
so good watching the fighting sequences in that movie because he wasn't just dodging every hit. They made sure he's a tough dude, but he got knocked on his ass so many times in that movie, and that's great.
Where on the opposite side of the spectrum, Man of Steel, I
Yeah,
think is a terrible movie. And it's not. I mean,
but it's kind of like, how do you even make Superman have impactful combat unless
yeah,
he's fighting someone of his same caliber? Like
you
any
need
low
that
level fight, he is just invincible.
you need that Marvel esque combat for something like Superman, though. It's much
Yeah,
brighter, much more hopeful, and kind of goofy. Whereas in Man of Steel, they took an extremely gritty approach where Zod and him were ripping down buildings and demolishing the city. And to me, it just comes across as kind of miserable for a
yeah,
Superman movie. Whereas when I go into a Batman movie, I realize it's going to be darker, and I think that's what more people want.
And
out of a
see,
Batman movie.
that's what we've been really talking about with the type of combat that's necessary for a Fallout show. Whereas,
Yeah.
like, I'd say for sure Elder Scrolls has some more liberties. With a lot of stuff, honestly. Elder Scrolls has a lot of liberties with things they can do with it still coming off good. Because they can do a little bit more fantastical combat where it's not as rough, not as gritty, and they can do more about the setting as well because there's not a specific vibe that they always have to go for. There's multiple vibes they can go for.
Yeah,
Like,
there are.
I think it'd be they'd have to just be kind of dumb in their choice when writing the story for them to mess up the Elder Scrolls one too bad. But I won't underestimate anybody's chance on being dumb when making an adaptation of anything, be
It's
honest.
a Netflix show.
Yeah, especially
offense.
it being a
I
Netflix
mean,
show. They're
yeah,
good with
Netflix
their
has got-
originals often. Netflix can do some good stuff with their originals, but when you see them try to do adaptations, it's kind of depressing.
Yeah, Cowboy Bebop was pretty bad.
Yeah, they try to also make things way raunchier than they need to be, like the Teen Titans one. They tried to make it raunchy. It's like, that's not the feel of the Teen Titans at all, really.
Elder
And
Scrolls don't really get
Elder
raunchy.
Scrolls doesn't get too raunchy, but I think they could throw in some raunchiness occasionally. It's something they could get away with more in a show than they could in a game. Because, like, they can have some sensual stuff happening.
Yeah.
And it not be as uncomfortable in TV form than it being in a game where you have to
Especially
go
in a
out looking
Bethesda
for
game.
it. Yeah. But I'm not saying that they need to make the whole thing raunchy. I'm just saying, like, Witcher sure did a good job with it, and so did Game of Thrones.
One thing I was gonna
But
say,
maybe
though,
draw it back from both those shows a bit.
Yeah, that's what I was
But
gonna say. This isn't The Witcher. This isn't
I'm
Game of
saying,
Thrones.
like, they could put it in places that it makes sense and is impactful, like somebody trying to seduce the main character, things
with
like that.
Skooma.
Oh, with Skooma. Oh, oh, date raping the main character with Skooma. Then that's messed up. I mean, that's practically what they'd be doing. Skooma drugging the main character. I was telling you, and you mentioned that while I was talking about they're trying to seduce the main character. What's going on? I mean, see,
That'd
they
be a
could
good plot.
add a little bit of raunchiness in there. And they definitely have to put in some, though, for Fallout. Fallout definitely has some
Yes.
raunchiness in there often.
Absolutely.
I mean, everybody, almost everyone, is a drug addict in the Fallout universe.
And some people are
almost
sensitive
everyone
about
is.
their woo-woo.
They're what?
Their woo-woo.
Yeah. I feel like they could get away with a lot of raunchiness in the Fallout universe.
I feel like they need it.
But
Like, if they
if
don't
they
have
add
it.
too much, though, I think it takes away. Like,
Yeah.
still not have as much as Game of Thrones.
And it
Game of
needs to
Thrones
not.
kind of, like, benefited from them being one of the first large-scale series that was that raunchy. And with that many sex scenes and nude scenes.
And they need to make sure they do not idolize those things. They don't idolize.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
The over-sexuality, I guess, or drug use, or the extreme violence.
Yeah.
They need to look at that all from a very cynical point of view.
Yeah, like the games do. Because, like, you see people in the games, like, you see a lot of people with, like, no respect for themselves in any way anymore.
Yeah.
They've traded that for survival. Completely. People have become the worst
That was nice.
people to ever exist on this planet just to live another day. Like, because you have people turn into murderers. You have people also trying to make it all go away by doing drugs all the time. so that
That's
they don't have to live in that world.
that's the whole theme too. Is war never changes. It's all about survival. Humanity will do anything to survive, uh,
Yeah,
or allow their group to survive.
yeah, for sure. And I mean, in a way, Fallout as a whole is practically, I feel like, almost a kind of like a metaphor for what happens to civilians during large-scale war, because they're still suffering. They are all the civilians suffering from a large-scale war that happened a long time ago. But
Yeah,
like, you see, obviously the war never changes with the small fights, well, smaller scale than worldwide nuclear war, but like the game's main plot fights are still pretty smaller scale. You see war in that instance, but the entire game's whole survival thing matches up with what's happening to civilians during large scale war.
I actually want to stop you there, though, talking about war never changes, because I'm thinking maybe for our next episode of Choice Words, we could talk about exclusively what does war never changes mean.
Yeah, actually sounds like a really good topic.
Yeah, I think that would be a really good discussion. But we're getting a pretty long recording here. So to wrap this up, overall, I think we've reiterated it enough times to where you guys know. But uh, a show based on an RPG, obviously you can't get that choice in there. But the biggest thing is don't try to adapt a whole game. Don't try to make too grand of a story in your first season, and understand what makes each of these settings those settings. So understand what makes Fallout Fallout, understand what makes Elder Scrolls tick, and I understand that that is a gargantuan task when
Yeah,
you have 40 years or 30 years of games to look at and to think about. And with Fallout, you've got three different companies that have worked on these. Four, if you include 76, which was made by Bethesda Austin, which is an offshoot studio. So there's a lot of ways you could get this wrong, but if you have good characters, if you get the setting, the atmosphere, and the tone right, you can do it.
yeah,
You can make something satisfying.
for sure. If this is the end of the discussion, I'd like to apologize for any background noises you may have heard on my end, because I am in a dorm.
I'm in an apartment, so you may have heard some stuff on mine too. Is there any? Do you have any final thoughts, though, Nate? Do you have anything else you want to say?
I think that we got it. I think that we summed it up really well. They really have to get the feel, and they have to make the setting good, and the characters compelling, and then I think that the main plot the characters are following is relatively, I mean, not saying it's not important, but it's relatively less important than those two things, because as long as the other criteria is met, the story will feel good.
Yeah.
Unless they just do something absolutely stupid. Just all of a sudden the aliens come and fall out, and that's the whole plot. That would be terrible.
They adapt to Mothership Zeta, the worst DLC ever made for Fallout.
Oh, it'd be a little bit funny,
Other
but
than
it
Fallout
just
7
wouldn't be
or
good.
Fallout Force Wasteland workshop stuff, those are probably the worst DLC made for Fallout, actually.
Yeah, definitely.
I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did,
Yeah.
give us a like, subscribe to the Bravosity to see more stuff like this. If you're on YouTube and if you're on some of our streaming apps, stay tuned for more choice words. If you're on YouTube, stay tuned for more choice words. We stream Thursdays from 4 to 6 usually. So check those out on twitch.tv/the Bravosity. Join our Discord down below if you want to hang out, talk. Let us know what you think in the comments. And yeah, it was good talking to you, Nate. It was a great discussion. I
Yeah.
hope this one doesn't end up garbage like the last one we did.
Yeah.